What is the single biggest D-move in all of history? Probably when they relocated Rasputin's schlong from his body to that jar. Opium wars were pretty dish. You don't wanna buy hard drugs from us and turn your population into useless addicts? Fine. We'll invade you and bombard your cities until you start buying. When the Mexican government rounded up thousands of Yaqui natives, made them walk over 300 kilometers to the coast, put them on boats, and sold them as slaves for about 25 cents. Most ended up on plantations in Veracruz where they were worked to death. Slavery was already illegal in Mexico at the time. Well, not really relevant, but when 50 Cent bought the first 4 rows of a Ja Rule concert, and Ja had to perform in front of 4 empty rows, lol. That woman scorned to kill ducking everybody. Hang about, I'll Google it. Saint Olga of Kiev. After her husband, the prince, was tortured and murdered by dissidents, Drevlian, she got vengeance by buried alive the first messengers, burnt boiled alive the second set of messengers, had a funeral feast for her late husband which included Drevlians, and then had 5,000 of them killed. After a year-long siege, Olga said, "Give me 3 pigeons and 3 sparrows from each house." The Drevlians rejoiced at the prospect of the siege ending for so small a price, and did as she asked. Olga then instructed her army to attach a piece of sulfur bound with small pieces of cloth to each bird. At nightfall, Olga told her soldiers to set the pieces aflame and release the birds. They returned to their nests within the city, which subsequently set the city ablaze. There was not a house that was not consumed, and it was impossible to extinguish the flames, because all the houses caught fire at once. As the people fled the burning city, Olga ordered her soldiers to catch them, killing some of them and giving the others as slaves to her followers. She left the remnants to pay tribute. It's a fine line between total D-move and badass on this one. A grave, a grave, a grave, a grave, a grave, a grave, a grave. Edit. While this blew up, went to sleep, and 22k upvotes later, I read through every direct reply and about 50% said D-move and 50% said badass. A whole slab want the Netflix show Game of Thrones spin-off. Many pointed out it's possibly not true. And finally, this tattoo, that you parasithium, is on topic and totally sweet. France asking Haiti for a compensation after Haiti overthrew the colonial administration. It took 143 years for Haiti to pay off that debt. Thomas Midgley invented Freon and putting lead into gasoline. He knew that putting lead into gasoline was a D-move, and he did it anyway for money. He knew because he got lead poisoning himself and still lied about its effects on people. Environmental historians have said that he has had the single largest impact on the Earth's atmosphere of any single organism in the history of the planet. Not to mention that lead levels directly correspond to lower cognitive abilities in the general population, and you can look up the dates to know who would have been affected. Before 1965, Indonesian government sent academicians, especially STEM graduates, to study in Eastern Europe. After the supposed communist uprising in the 30th of September 1965, the government revoked their citizenship and declared them stateless. They risked persecution and possible torture and murder if they insist on returning. These nuclear physicist, master engineer, and PhD graduates take menial jobs, becoming janitors and wait tables to carry on living with virtually no possibility of return to their country. P.S. I'm adding some reading to anyone who are interested. Edit. Grammar plus reading material. Around the formation of the Persian Empire, Herodotus tells the story how King Astyages, the last king of Media, had a dream that his daughter would give birth to a king who would overthrow him. So he orders his general Harpagus to kill the child at birth. Harpagus doesn't want to kill the baby, spill royal blood, so he gives the child, Cyrus, to a shepherd to raise. 10 years later, Cyrus is discovered alive. King Astyages fakes being happy that the kid is alive, suggesting he always regretted issuing that order. To celebrate, he plans a feast and tells Harpagus to send his son over to play with Cyrus. During the banquet, King Astyages has the son of Harpagus killed, cooked, and fed to Harpagus. When the act was revealed, it is said that Harpagus did not react other than to gather the pieces of his son and remove them for burial. Harpagus bides his time. Much later, Cyrus is gathering forces against King Astyages. Astyages orders Harpagus, as his primary general, to lead the army against Cyrus. After a 3-day battle, Harpagus took his revenge for the death of his son by turning on the battlefield in favor of Cyrus, resulting in Astyages' defeat and the formation of the Persian Empire. Compulsory edit. My first award. Thanks, kind stranger. That time a fish evolved legs and crawled out of the ocean. Things just went downhill from there. Those Methodicas evolving to suck mammal blood, and now we got to worry about mosquitoes, leeches, ticks, etc. Your pet leaving your room after you carried them in. Ray Kroc stealing McDonald's out from under the brothers and not even paying them royalties. Hitler killing Hitler and thus not giving everyone else the satisfaction of doing so. Mao Zedong's Cultural Revolution. Basically Mao's return to power after the failure of the Great Leap Forward and an opportunity to purge political rivals. The Cultural Revolution is estimated to have killed another 20 million, on top of the 30 million from the famine that followed the Great Leap Forward. When God told Abraham to sacrifice his son Isaac, and right when Isaac was begging for his life and his dad was about to drive a knife into his chest, God said, "Psych, I got you good, bro. Kill that ram over there instead." That lady who stole the unborn baby out the other lady. Russia telling Ukraine to give up their nukes for peaceful independence only for Russia to take back Crimea a couple decades later. The burning of the Library of Alexandria. Russian army pushing Hitler back across Europe. Get to the outskirts of Warsaw and broadcast in Polish to have all the men in the city join the fight. Cue large uprising. Russia holds back until all the men in the city are killed, so there's nobody left to resist when they occupy, and then resume pushing Hitler back across Europe. Edit sources requested. So the story goes that there's this people in southern Iraq whose agriculture, economy and way of living were built around them living within the swamps. They were not very fond of Saddam Hussein and his regime and did a protest march towards Baghdad. So meanwhile they moved towards the capital. Saddam took some excavators and drained the whole swamp. Problem solved. I always thought the Fed putting Andrew Jackson on the $20 felt like a big duck you since he hated the idea of a centralized bank. Prince Albert actually moving his supposedly massive D inside Queen Victoria. He basically fathered a bloodline that caused every bit of upset in the early 20th century. If it wasn't for his massive D moving, there would have been no First World War. Brutus pretending to be Caesar's best friend and then literally stabbing him in the back. Having different measurement system across the world, and also different types of sockets. Philip of Macedonia threatened the Spartans, "If I invade Laconia, you will be destroyed and never rise again." The Spartans replied with, "If." IDK man. The Holocaust seemed pretty bad. The ape who decided being a complex being was a good idea. Putting your fishing boats to the coast of other countries because you already fished everything in your country's surrounding sea. Making the woman who had her labia melted together due to McDonald's not wanting give people refills look like a thieving itch because she was in the right and only wanted her medical bills paid. Edit. Thank you for the award, kind stranger. Late, but forcing Alan Turing to take hormones to cure his homosexuality. That's D-ish in general, but especially after all his help in cracking intercepted messages during World War II and helped the Allies defeat the Nazis. The white American conquest over the native populations is probably a strong contender. Large majority of Native American tribes were quite welcoming of newcomers in need. There's an entire holiday about being thankful for the kindness and the generosity of the Native Americans. In return, they were gifted with smallpox and other lethal diseases, had every one of their treaties ignored, and were wiped out whenever they tried to complain about it, had their primary prey species deliberately hunted to extinction, had their culture reduced to primitive shamanism and a few totemic symbols. Those that weren't killed outright were forcibly marched across the continent to poorer land in an even known as the Ducking Trail of Tears. The ancient Greeks mobbed down voting Socrates for not agreeing with a hive mind. He was either going to be banished from the subreddit or drink poison. My Duckus cat was on the couch this morning, so I went to cuddle with him and the arsehole tries to leave as soon as I get there. In the beginning was the creation of the universe. This has made a lot of people angry and has been widely regarded as a bad move. Mother Teresa made children suffer because she thought suffering was more Christ-like than healing. Making a free-to-play game in the App Store but making it so you have to buy things to be able to continue the game. Those goddamn Mongolians. The Columbine and Sandy Hook shooters. Duck those guys. The repatriation of Eastern European pilots who fought for the RAF during the Battle of Britain. Straight into Stalin's tender grasp. When Nani tried to steal Cristiano Ronaldo's goal and got it ruled out for offside. It's hilarious even if you don't like football, soccer. Make sure you watch the second angle, 035, so you can see just how bad this was. In terms of deaths, several seemingly simple events triggered World War I. That's 40 deaths that a sandwich cell or an auto mechanic, or even a grandma could have averted. Many world leaders were related, and several said if their grandmother was still alive she would have put a stop to it before it spread. World War I lead to World War II. China's Great Leap Forward had about 30 direct deaths and another 20 or so indirect deaths. On smaller scales, history is littered with betrayal and intrigue. Who knows what treasures were lost, and what discoveries and inventions we don't have because of them. Do we not have flying cars and hoverboards due to some greedy jerk? Was world peace and global lives of ease lost because somebody made a D-move? We may never know. Andrew Jackson disregarding the Supreme Court and starting the Trail of Tears. The Munich Conference. Like oh my god what a rich show and a D-move on both sides. Basically in 1938, Germany wanted to get a piece of land from Czechoslovakia, lands which were populated with ethnic Germans. So to appease Hitler and Germany and avoid another war, the Western powers, France and Britain agreed for a conference. Now you think Czechoslovakia would be involved in the conference, but now the Western powers and Germany, Italy were the only parties discussing it and agreed to Hitler's terms that Germany would get the lands they asked for. Not only this was a huge D-move, but Neville Chamberlain had the audacity to state that the signing of the agreement, that conference would be peace for our time. Oh, and the best part. 6 months later after the agreement was signed, Hitler occupies the rest of Czechoslovakia and isn't liberated until the end of the war, following a coup d'etat which would turn them into a communist country in 1948. People normally talk how Poland is basically the punching bag, but at least you can say the Poles went down fighting. The Czechoslovaks, however, were completely blindsided and ducked right from the start by Hitler's ambitions and betrayal of the Western powers. Hitler invading Czechoslovakia. Watson and Crick using Rosalind Franklin's work but not even mentioning her name in the final work because she was a woman. She also couldn't get the Nobel Prize award. Science is full of D's. My cousin peeled all the wrappers off of tins in our kitchen so we didn't know what was inside. Typhoid Mary was a D. She had to wash her hands and could have kept cooking. Instead she runs away to cook without washing her hands elsewhere. Not the biggest, but that chimpanzee that used the frog as a fleshlight was a bit of an asshole. That time the US gave Japan a white flag so they could easily surrender. Context: in 1853 the United States sent Commodore Perry to Japan to negotiate the opening of Japan's ports to Western trade. According to Ways of the World by Robert W. Strayer, Perry presented his reluctant hosts with, among other gifts, a white flag for surrender should hostilities follow. King Leopold II, Fuuak him. Genghis Khan in both senses of the word. The reasons behind the Trail of Tears. An integrated Native American tribe got kicked to the boonies because the white merchants couldn't compete with their tribal protections. Appealed to the Supreme Court. Won. And still got genocided. Alliance helping Poland during World War II. Martin Shkreli raising the price of that one drug from $13.50 a tablet to $750 a tablet. This was the biggest DI move I found in my family history. My great-great-great-grandpa came to the United States alone, said he would make some money and then send for his wife and kids. He did send the money, but to his wife's dismay, upon arrival she'd found the douchebag ghosted her at the last moment. A few months later found out he'd moved to a neighboring town and had another family. Leaving your shopping cart anywhere but the cart drop off. When my buddy Trevor ate my doner that he claimed was his, when I know for a fact he ate his because I was right there when we got them delivered and he ate his right away. Trevor. That was a D move, man. France forcing Haiti to pay reparations for over 100 years until the 1950s for the losses incurred by their colonial slave owners when Haiti declared independence in the 1830s. This crippled their economy, forcing them to waste a century of trade surplus that could have been used to develop their nation. They continue to be one of the poorest countries in the world, and so far France still has yet to give much back. Apple removing the headphone jack. Attacking the Russian forces at Osawik to the point where they had to use zombies. My girlfriend's a florist and she just told me a small wedding she did the flowers for cancelled last second because the entire groom's family didn't show up. IDK if that's the biggest D move in all of history, but damn that's pretty D. Dude cut his D off and threw it at a cop. Making a Facebook account mandatory for Oculus Quest 2. Rapists, child abusers, kidnappers, doing their D-move thing. Worse yet, child abusing, kidnapping rapists. There's a sect of Ds out there doing things that are puke-worthy. My dog coming to my chair for a treat, getting one, farting, then leaving. Nintendo partnering with Sony to develop a CD-ROM add-on peripheral for the Super Nintendo. Then, at the very last minute, just as they were to announce their new product, Nintendo backed out of the deal and instead decided to partner with Philips. Philips ended up making their own console called the CDI on which Nintendo allowed some of their licensed IPs to be used, all of which failed miserably. Sony went ahead and finished development without Nintendo, and eventually released the intended add-on as their own standalone console called simply a PlayStation. D-move by Nintendo completely backfired. Yesterday, when a co-worker heated up a fish leftovers in the microwave. Hijacking 2 planes and flying them into buildings wasn't very kind. Martin Shkreli, not sure I spelled that right, jacking up the price of AIDS medicine by 700% for no reason other than being a greedy piece of it. He got his comeuppance though. Whoever decided that healthcare should be for profit. Have you ever heard of the Brazen Bull? The Brazen Bull was created by Perillus of Athens. It was a large bronze bull hollow on the inside with a door on the side. It was designed as an execution device. Victims would be loaded into the hollow stomach of the bull and a fire was lit under the bull. Don't worry though, you didn't have to listen to the victims' screams as they cooked alive. The head was fitted with a special system of pipes to make the screams sound like an angry bull. Proud of his horrific invention, Perillus presented the bull to Phalaris, the tyrant of Sicily, and expected to be rewarded. Instead, Phalaris tricked Perillus into climbing into the bull, locked the door and lit the fire. Eventually satisfied with the test as Perillus screamed in pain, Phalaris let him out, had him taken to the top of a nearby hill and thrown off to his death. The D-moves aren't done yet. It is said that when Phalaris was eventually overthrown, he himself became a victim of the Brazen Bull. I used to pee in the bathroom sink. When Scar kills his brother and blames his nephew. What the newly independent United States did to the Native Americans was pretty bad. As an Irish person though, Britain's track record in Ireland is really bad. Gandhi is not the saint he is most of the time presented as. Just one of many stories about Gandhi being a D. When Gandhi's wife was stricken with pneumonia, British doctors told her husband that a shot of penicillin would heal her. Nevertheless, Gandhi refused to have alien medicine injected into her body, and she died. Soon after, Gandhi caught malaria and, relenting from the standard applied to his wife, allowed doctors to save his life with quinine. He also allowed British doctors to perform an appendectomy on him, an alien operation if ever there was one.